In 1963, Wendell Scott crossed the finish line first at a NASCAR race in Jacksonville, Florida. He won, and everyone there saw it. And then NASCAR handed the trophy to someone else. That's not a conspiracy theory, and it's not a rumor. That actually happened, and it's just one chapter in a story that NASCAR has never fully answered. To understand that moment, you have to understand who Wendell Scott was and what he was up against before he ever turned a wheel in competition. Scott was born in Danville, Virginia in 1921. He wasn't born into racing money. He wasn't backed by a sponsor or groomed by a team. He was a black man in the Jim Crow South who learned to drive fast running moonshine past police who were always right behind him. That's not a metaphor. That's literally how he learned to drive and race. And that skill and that instinct would define everything that came next for him. When Scott decided he wanted to race competitively in the early 1950s, NASCAR was not a welcoming place. And that's putting it gently. The sport was built in the South, and the tracks were in the South. The fans were overwhelmingly Southern white men who weren't exactly lining up to cheer for a black competitor. And the people running the sport knew that. Scott faced threats. He faced sabotage, and there were tracks that didn't want him there at all. There were competitors who made it clear on and off the track that he wasn't welcome and he wasn't part of them. But he kept showing up anyway, because what else do you do when racing is the only thing that makes sense to you? He built his own cars, wrenched on them himself, scrapped for sponsorship that almost never came, while other drivers had teams and resources. Scott had determination and not much else. And somehow, just somehow, that was almost enough. Scott competed in NASCAR's top series from 1961 to 1973. Over that stretch, he made 495 starts. Think about that number for a second. 495 races as a self-funded, self-maintained, essentially unsupported competitor in the world's most grueling stock car series. He never had a factory deal, never had a major sponsor, and there were races where he'd show up with a car that he'd fixed with whatever parts he could just scrounge together that week. And he still finished races, and he was able to even run competitively. He earned the respect of drivers who raced against him, even when the system around him didn't respect that. Richard Petty said Scott was tougher than people gave him credit for. And that's not nothing coming from the king. But the recognition Scott deserved, the kind that comes with money and opportunity and a real shot at competing at the front, that never came, and the sport made sure of that. On December 1st of 1963 in Jacksonville, Florida, at the Speedway Park 200, Wendell Scott is racing. He's been competitive all day, and as the laps wind down, something remarkable starts happening. Scott is at the front, not just in the mix, but he is at the front and leading the race. He crosses the finish line first. Let that sit for a second. A black man in the Jim Crow South in 1963 just won a NASCAR race in the top series in front of everybody. And then the sport that claimed to be about pure competition did something that revealed exactly what it was really about. They held the trophy presentation, and they put Buck Baker in victory lane. They announced Buck Baker as the winner. The official explanation was a scoring error, a mix-up on laps, and an honest mistake. Maybe, but here's what we know. Scott was eventually, hours later, given credit for the win in the record books. He never received a trophy. There was no victory lane moment, no celebration, no recognition in front of the crowd that had just watched him do something historic. NASCAR quietly updated the records and moved on like it never happened. Scott continued racing after Jacksonville, and he kept showing up, kept wrenching, kept competing. But the sport never gave him his moment. The win that should have changed everything, that should have opened doors, attracted sponsors, and forced NASCAR to reckon with what Scott had just accomplished, just disappeared in the record books with no fanfare. He retired in 1973 after a serious crash at Talladega left him with injuries that he never fully recovered from. He spent his later years in Danville, largely forgotten by the sport he had given everything to. There was no ceremony, no lifetime achievement recognition, no NASCAR coming back to say that we got it wrong and you deserve better. The 1977 film Greased Lightning, starring Richard Pryor, told a version of Scott's story. It introduced him to a wider audience, but even that couldn't force NASCAR to properly reckon with what had just happened. Wendell Scott died in 1990. He was 69 years old. In 2020, NASCAR finally retired the number 34 in Scott's honor. Better late than never, I guess, but also 30 years too late for the man himself to see it. His grandchildren still race. The Scott name is still in motorsports. That persistence and that refusal to let the sport push them out completely is maybe the most Wendell Scott thing imaginable. But here's what stays with me about the story. Wendell Scott didn't just overcome adversity. He overcame a system that was actively working against him at every level, with almost no resources, and still won a race. He still was able to make 495 starts, and he earned the respect of the best drivers of his era. And NASCAR handed his trophy to someone else. Wendell Scott deserved better from the sport, from the record books, and from the moment in victory lane that they took from him. If you didn't know his story before today, and now you do, that's exactly why this channel exists. If you want more stories like this one, please subscribe and drop a comment. Did you know about Wendell Scott before this video? I'd love to know.